Hi, everyone. It's Dr. Josh. Here are 3 levers that can change the brain fast. Today's show is about the 3 fastest levers we have for slowing or reversing cognitive decline: peptides, hormone restoration, and nutrition. And maybe a bonus lever that our next guest, Dr. Nick Delgado, will cover. When you align all 3, the brain often improves far sooner than expected. Welcome back to Alzheimer's Breakthrough with Dr. Josh, where we sit down with the world's leading thinkers on cognitive longevity prevention and neurologic resilience. Today, I'm joined by someone whose work sits at the intersection of hormones, inflammation, blood biomarkers, and performance physiology. Dr. Nick Delgado is a health educator, researcher, and the author of more than 15 books on longevity, adrenal health, hormone balance, and lifestyle medicine, including The Estrogen Fix for Men, Mastering Love, Sex, and Intimacy, Grow Young and Slim, and Blood Doesn't Lie. He's completed doctoral work in health sciences with a focus on endocrinology, longevity, and peak performance physiology. Over 4 decades, he's collaborated with icons like T. Colin Campbell, Nathan Pritikin, and Dr. Michael Clapper, and has coached athletes, executives, and ultra-high performers. Dr. Nick is known for his emphasis on hormone optimization for brain health, early adoption of continuous blood biomarker monitoring, and he's insisted that chronic inflammation, sex hormone disruption, and endocrine immune crosstalk are foundational drivers of cognitive decline. Today, we're going to explore the hormone-brain axis, immune signaling, micronutrient systems, and what his 45 years of data reveal about Alzheimer's prevention. Dr. Nick, thank you so much for joining us today.
Dr. Joshua Hellman, there's a time and place for people, but the most important thing we could talk about is brain function and cognition. And I'm really proud and excited to share with your audience because there are some amazing breakthroughs that very few people are aware of. And I hope they simply stay tuned to the entire show because there's certain gems that we're going to really share that they need to get the nuances, each of the little details, because sometimes the success is in those smallest details that others may have missed, but we're here to tell you it can be done.
Awesome. And what I love about your background is literally I don't want to give away your age, but literally, is it okay if I call you one of the grandfathers of this field? I mean,
it's amazing to me. I was always the youngest in the medical audiences, and now I'm kind of the oldest. And it's like really fun because I don't feel my age, and I certainly don't act my age. I do have 5 children, ages 17 to 49, and I have 5 grandchildren. So I'm truly a grandpa. So I can fall for that title, the grandpa of anti-aging and cognitive repair.
That's beautiful. And let's start with one of the things that I find so important, and that's nutrition. And I feel like I'm interviewing an ancient textbook, not that you are an ancient textbook, but literally you lectured with and for not doctor, but Pritikin. Is that right?
Yeah, Nathan Pritikin himself. I was one of the early pioneers seeking solutions and answers. And I myself learned about Nathan Pritikin from 60 Minutes, and he was appearing on a 60-minute segment that was the highest viewed in the history of 60 Minutes at that time, because usually 60 Minutes comes in to expose people for fraud and things that are less than desirable in the business arena. And here they found this incredible program where they called My 3 Patients. I have the original clip of it. It's absolutely incredible, where they followed the Miami Heart Institute, chose 3 patients that were scheduled for bypass surgery. All 3 of them went through the Pritikin program for diet and exercise, and they essentially reversed their condition to the point where even their own medical doctors, including their cardiologists, were astonished and said, I don't know what's happened, but somehow these guys don't need surgery. And there's this dramatic turnaround, all through a whole foods diet and exercise program. Little did they know, though, we were so far ahead of our time that later that influenced Michael Greger, How Not to Diet, How Not to Die, and his whole nutritionfacts.org, a number of other practitioners, including John McDougall, rest his soul, he passed on this last year, and other greats that you and I, we spoke about John McDougall and his incredible career, and all of the other great people, Joel Fuhrman, they all directly or indirectly had their beginning with Nathan Pritikin. I was one of the few living individuals who worked with him on a daily basis for over 3 years.
Right. And from what I've heard from you and from others, he was brilliant, right?
Yeah. He was like a walking encyclopedia textbook, maybe better than AI. You asked him a question, he searched it, he told you, and he was just tireless and just so enthusiastic. Even if he had a line of 500 people, they'd line up, to ask him questions after his events. And I would stand next to him while he'd answer the questions. And I always marveled at, with enthusiasm, he just treated each person as if it was the first time he'd ever been asked a question. Of course, I know he had been asked it hundreds of times, but he took it to heart and really expressed his need to transmit that enthusiasm and share with them there was not only hope, but he felt very confident by embarking on this lifestyle medicine. He was kind of the forerunner to all of lifestyle medicine, this lifestyle medicine approach that did dramatic things for circulation, for diabetes, for heart disease, for brain cognition, for multiple conditions that I have his original medical journal articles that I retained. And I don't believe they exist anywhere else except in his own written notes in my files.
Wow. And I'm curious, in those notes, do you remember, is Kempner's work from North Carolina, is that part of the file or?
Yes. And John McDougall, last year and a half ago, he gave me the volume textbooks. I don't know if you've seen them, but Walter Kempner, the actual textbooks, I'm literally looking at them on my medical library here, and you read through them. It's interesting about Pritikin. He would read through these medical journals and he would almost understate what was possible, because when I read the original journals, I was like astonished that he had this incredible recall. But here are the actual textbooks I'm going to bless your audience with, because when you're kind of like a medical nerd like you and I are, it's like,
Sure.
Here's one of the original Walter Kempner volume textbooks, and here's volume 2 of his incredible work of the rice fruit diet. That was a revolution in helping people who are massively obese with kidney disorders and diabetes. And he was able to reverse them in the course of several months and leading to a year follow-up. The average person lost 127 pounds. And those people who went from over 400 pounds reached toward their ideal body weight and sustained it for decades later.
So share with us, because I understand Kempner's rice diet is no longer at Duke. You can't find it in North Carolina. So share with us, do you agree with that? Do you agree with basically a high-carb, low-fat diet if you want to improve your brain function or other things like that?
I would expand on it. I think Dr. Kempner at the time narrowed the field to make it really simple for his patients. He said, look, you can eat as much white rice, and it wasn't even brown rice, as much white rice as you want, as much fruit as you want, ad lib. And essentially, it's kind of hard to imagine this, but white rice is actually by definition a complex carbohydrate, because when you chew it, the saliva, it breaks down slowly and breaks down at about 2 calories per minute, enters the brain at a very appropriate rate, sustaining that excellent blood sugar, the energy, the clarity, while being amongst the lowest fat, lowest protein intake. And it was Dr. Kempner's belief that was well proven later that the excess protein in the average person's diet is a troublesome problem. To Garth Davis's book, if you read Proteinaholics, And I'm going to have him on my show coming up pretty soon. But the point is, when you're consuming animal product, it's highly toxic to the kidney. So his theory was, if we pulled out all this excess protein and gave the lowest protein food possible, rice and fruit, that it would somehow help the kidneys. And he was absolutely right. There were so many people who no longer required kidney dialysis. Not only that, they were fully prepared to give insulin to these individuals because they thought, oh gosh, we're giving these diabetics a lot of sugar, if you will. But because it broke down slowly from the fruit, which has polyphenols, and that stabilizes blood sugar as well, that these individuals not only thrived, their kidneys survived, and then they even reversed their diabetes as well.
Diabetes, and then also I remember seeing an EKG of a patient with congestive heart failure who went from with a huge left ventricle size, left ventricular hypertrophy. It resolved using the Kempner diet, and this is back in like the 1930s and 1940s. This is ancient history, and that's why I jokingly said you're the grandfather or great grandfather.
Pritikin would tell the story often. I loved his ability to lecture because he always weaved in real life stories, and he knew the inside story because he knew Dr. Walter Kempner. He knew these great scientists. I came to the original Pritikin Longevity Center conferences, much like you and I will be at the A4M in a couple of weeks, that draws doctors and scientists from all over the world. I was part of the original doctor team that went out to lecture to over 35,000 physicians around the world and educate and teach. And I, to this day, weave in some of these original Pritikin stories because they were just not only so believable, but they were inspiring. I mean, Eula Weaver, who age, I think it was 91, she entered the Senior Olympics and won the gold medal. Well, she was the only one in that age category, so she won. But the point was she was able to run in the Senior Olympics a mile run, And so these stories were great because she could barely walk when she first came to our center. She was fraught with arthritis. She had high blood pressure. She was borderline congestive heart failure. And all that turned around within 30 days, and she was out moving her body. And this is what inspired Michael Greger to find out about his own grandmother who made those dramatic changes. And that's what brought him into this whole field of plant-based lifestyle medicine.
Right. And I heard Dean Ornish speak last week at a lifestyle medicine conference, and he referenced Pritikin as one of the important progenitors of the whole lifestyle movement. But let me ask you, if we had Pritikin with us today, what do you think he would say? Because you heard him for years. What do you think he would say if I or someone said, what can I do with my diet or else other things to prevent or reverse Alzheimer's or degenerative brain conditions?
Well, I recall him talking about, for example, Parkinson's disease. And he described how there was a portion of the brain that would have atherosclerotic plaques. And because of the restriction of blood flow to that part of the brain, he often would say, if you could catch it just before the serious shakes start to occur and they start losing muscular control, that you indeed, in many cases, could not only prevent, maybe even reverse many of the symptoms associated with Parkinson's disease. He told many stories of individuals that I met myself because I was there at the Pritikin Longevity Center in 1978, 79, 80. So that dates me a little bit if you think I've been doing this for a better part of, 45 years, right? And so that being said, it was really remarkable that some people would come in with poor brain cognition. We were supposed to be a wellness center, and we were supposed to just take in people who just wanted to get better. No, people were coming in wheelchairs and gurneys, and it was like, oh my gosh, we're dealing with very serious pathologies and conditions. But we saw remarkable results. So long as they could eat and at times eventually get them up and walking on a treadmill, we would walk them on a treadmill about 3 or 4 times a day. Very short walks, but we did that. And we had buffet style food. So everyone would eat from the Pritikin whole food diet recipe book. And he called it the regression diet. Now, for the public, they gave them was a modified diet that included like lean ounces, 3 ounces of lean fish, chicken, or turkey each day. It had non-fat dairy products. But really looking back, he had what was called the regression diet in the longevity center. And that we basically got it down. It was a big joking matter. We'd say, oh, if you can find the 1 ounce of lean meat that's in one of the dishes here during the week, it was only once a week they were allowed meat. And he felt people would cheat if they knew they could eat it daily. And if it said once a week, they'd cheat on that, eat it a couple times a week, and then still get remarkable results. The thing I think that was concerning, he was trying to make it so close to the American lifestyle. He included non-fat milk, and non-fat milk is highly inflammatory. I found a reference that suggests that dairy product in Dr. John McDougall's book, McDougall's Medicine, A Second Opinion, that leukemia could be transmitted from cows to chimpanzees. Chimps are not far off from humans. So it had me very concerned because Pritikin himself, one of his ultimate demise was he had developed hairy cell leukemia. And he survived over 20 years, I think because of his lifestyle, but he went in for interferon therapy and treatment. And then, one night he decided, I don't want to continue on a machine. And the therapy didn't go well. And he decided to take his life one night. So that's his thing. But all I can say is that Pritikin was so remarkable. His mind was so sharp. And he would often show me his laboratory work, showing how good his cholesterol level was. And he liked me a lot because I was into weightlifting and physicality and football. And, he was more into running. So he would always defer to me in the audience and say, he knows a lot about building muscle on a plant-based diet that's low in protein. And so, I would share with the audience that. I even came up to Dean Ornish one day and I said, hey, I'd like to interview you. And he kind of ignored me, didn't want to be interviewed by me. And then he heard me on stage for about 5 minutes talking to the audience. And he said, I would love to be interviewed by you.
Aw, that's beautiful. Wow. So again, one of the commonalities, I think, from both Pritikin and Kempner is that they advocated a low-fat diet. Is that correct?
Absolutely correct. It wasn't so much, I think people need to understand, Pritikin identified a term called lipotoxemia, which means too much fat poisoning. So he wasn't opposed to the natural fats inherent within foods. In fact, you could eat a little bit of nuts, seeds, avocados, olives, very small amounts, get the omegas. You could essentially, his belief was don't extract the oil out of the olives, eat the whole olive, eat the whole food because the fiber slows the absorption of those fats. His concern, and this was proven years ago, by Dr. Meyer Friedman, type A, type B personality fame, the famous theory about stress and its related conditions. And he took firemen and they gave them a glass of heavy cream. They then took a microscope that, as most people know, I'm probably the world expert in microscopy. I'll be doing the test at booth 1115 at the A4M event, microscopy. But the point is, he observed this study that within an hour of consuming heavy cream, at the smallest capillary level, you could see clumping of, or called rouleau, which is French for stack of coins. And the clumping of the blood cells from the stickiness of the fat would cause the cells to clump and restrict circulation to the brain by as much as 30% and overall reduce cognition drastically. So to your point, if a client or person watching the show, a patient, is struggling with cognition, brain fog, one of the leading causes of brain fog is excess oils or fats. And excess is not like a teaspoon that might be in a recipe or something, but it's like if you go to an Indian restaurant and you eat food that's just literally soaked, vegetable foods soaked in ghee and oil, all that oil, when you consume that much, it goes into the bloodstream and it thickens the blood dangerously. So his concern wasn't not so much whether it was saturated, polyunsaturated, or monosaturated, it was the total load of fat in the day. So by eating a rice fruit diet, potatoes, fruits, vegetables, beans, and peas, you're automatically getting what he called 10-10-80. 10% fat, 10% protein, 80% complex carbohydrates. He felt on the longest lived people in the world, and he often shared the story about the Tarahumara Indians, these great ultra marathoners that run 180 miles nonstop on eating beans, panola, rice, and avocado and things like this. These individuals were fabulous long distance runners. And so the point was that circulation and getting essential fatty acids, he even said that an excess high fat diet would cause an essential fatty acid deficiency because you need the omegas, omega 6, 9, 12, and so forth. But we often are deficient in certain omegas because of the type of fats that people eat and the excess amount of fats.
Exactly right. So what do you say to someone who, and this is commonly going around on social media. Well, for your brain, we all know your brain's made of fat. Therefore, you need to eat a lot of fat in order to have a healthy brain. I mean, what do you say to that?
Well, you need essential fatty acids. No one denies the omegas are important. I'll give people an example. I'll take chia seed and flax seed, which if you look at Udo's oil, those are the main omegas that he derives his fats from. I would say better than taking that separated oil is to take and soak the flaxseed and the chia seed and walnuts together. Soak them overnight in water, and they become like a mush or a porridge. And then I'll slip in some grapes, some berries, blueberries, blackberries, and maybe I'll use a plant-based yogurt. So I want some probiotics, and I'll have that for breakfast. And so I'm getting a good amount. And when you chew those seeds thoroughly, that have become alive, because the enzymes, when they're exposed to water, they literally go from a dormant seed to a live living organism, and life begins life. And we believe restoring those enzymes may be a critical factor in the combat against brain cancer, against tumors in the body, and getting those essential fatty acids. So Dr. Press once did a study that Nathan Pritikin cited, and he said, we decided to put people on a glucose IV, which was 100% glucose sugar, no fat, no protein. Within 30 days, most of the people developed an essential fatty acid deficiency defined by the skin getting a little dry, a little bit eczema, a little bit of signs of omega deficiency. He then rubbed essential fatty acid oil on their skin, and 0.01% fat was enough to relieve an essential fatty acid deficiency. I personally will use omega oils on my face and skin when I go outdoors in the sun, and I'm getting my omegas without having to take in oil through my mouth. If I take it through my mouth, it clumps my blood together. If I go through the skin, I believe it's health promoting.
That makes a lot of sense. Going back a second, you mentioned Indian food and just from a practical standpoint, I've gone to Indian restaurants and I've said, is there any way you can make me a vegetable dish without lots of added oil? And most of the time they look at me like I'm an alien. So what I've ended up doing is I don't eat out. If I can, I avoid eating out. I'll just make Indian dishes myself. Is that similar to what you do, just to lower the fat? And
I only found one Indian restaurant in Newport Beach. I believe it's Mayar is the title of it. And they did it for me. I have a doctor who's an Indian friend. And when she comes into town, we go to that restaurant. I have another doctor who's Iran. She was an interpreter during the war, and her and I go to that restaurant. So it's one of the few restaurants literally that will cater to, I give them a good tip, but will cater to preparing the dishes with the spices. That Indian food is so good with turmeric and all these wonderful spices. And I said, look, when I go into restaurants like Asian or Indian restaurants, if I can get them to do it, I say, I want my dishes prepared with I use this word, little or no oil. When I say little, I give them permission to use a touch. And if they prepare it right, I know, because when I go home, I'm either just wiped out, falling asleep, and I put my blood under the microscope because I'm a freak and I want to see what happened. I can feel when there's too much oil in my blood. So Pritikin often said that we would be better off doing, instead of a glucose 24-hour monitor, a triglyceride monitor from hour to hour, because it's the triglycerides that influences insulin sensitivity, whether or not you develop high hemoglobin A1C, whether you have ongoing high diabetic range levels. And so typically in the middle of the day, my triglycerides will run 75 as low as 45. When it gets under 45, I'm feeling pretty hungry. And so after a meal, it get up to about 120, 150, but not like an average American who has to fast for their blood test to get some kind of a reading. Otherwise, their levels, I measure them at 200, 300, 400. When it's that high, you see rouleau and clumping of the blood, massive clumping. And I always ask them, what'd you eat? Oh, I had a hamburger. Oh, I had a cheesecake. Oh, I had Indian food. It's almost without exception. That's what I see.
Well, and just to be clear, this is not ancient history from 50 years ago. This is today. If you draw your own blood and look at it under a microscope or that of a patient,
yep,
you see the same thing. And
yeah, you can see my microscopes that I have here in
Right.
my studio. So I
Okay.
actually plug in anyone who wants when they come into my studio. I say, look, I'm going to record this. I'll share it with just you, but if you give me permission, I'll share it with the world. And anyone who's anybody, if they have some degree of confidence, will come in. And if they're espouting their theory and beliefs, I say, let's put it to the test. Let's see where you come up.
Right. And even before you use a microscope, I can just draw your blood. If you make a mistake and end up eating a really fatty, oily meal, I can draw your blood, and I can actually, like 10 minutes after you eat, I can actually put that blood in a test tube and see with the gross eye, you can actually see the fat layer out on top.
I once showed Michael Greger, the famous plant-based doctor, because he worked for me. I don't know if you know this. Back in 1980 in Torrance, California, I had Delgado Medical, and he worked for me for 2 years. And so,
wait. So was he in medical school then, or what was he doing then?
No, he was anesthesia, and he found out about Nathan Pritikin and me, and then he wanted to come work with me, and I hired him to work with me. Just after I'd worked with Pritikin, he came to work as one of my medical directors in Torrance, California.
I didn't know this first. So what did he do for you for those 2 years?
He would see our patients. He would write up recommendations, because I owned a diagnostic lab and a blood laboratory. And to your point, I literally showed him vials of blood of my own, and my blood you normally think of looks red. Mine looks black. It's so clear of fats, and you don't see any fat pulling to the top. I then showed him examples of other people's blood, and it looks creamy yellow. And if you just let it sit for a while, a whole table of fat goes to the very top, like a grease pie at the top. And he took a picture of that, and I see a talk he does now showing those exact slides.
That's awesome. So he used what he learned from you to educate the world. That is so cool.
Yeah.
So the other thing that I like to explain is, so just like you can see a one-time measure of the fat layering out, guess what? If your blood vessels, if your arteries, your carotids, or the other blood vessels in the brain and elsewhere, if those vessels are chronically exposed to those super high fat levels, unfortunately, often those arteries will get clogged up. So when people say, oh, I need to eat lots of fat because I need to get that fat into my brain. No, it's the exact opposite. If you end up blocking your carotids and other blood vessels to your brain's not going to get anything, including oxygen, and you're going to end up with vascular brain damage, which is one of the common causes of Alzheimer's and dementia.
Right. So here's a classic. Can you see the picture of Michael Clapper?
Yes, that's from a few years ago.
and take a look at the title of this book he wrote for me. Look.
Oh, wow. Yes. Oh, that's so cool. Pregnancy, Children, and the Vegan Diet. Wow. And you know what? He is still lecturing today.
Oh, yeah.
To medical students.
Yeah. And by the way, he is, between you and I and your audience, he is defaulted to me as a hormone expert, which should get to our next segment, because I review the top doctors in the world, their lab work, and they ask for my feedback about what they should do as we age, because even on the healthiest diet, at some point, this aging monster, I'll call it, starts to creep in, and it starts to reduce our testosterone, our DHA, our pregnenolone that's necessary for the brain. And people say, oh, but I got to have cholesterol for brain function. It is a master sterile. It's a waxy sterile. It's like a hormone. It's not really a fat. It's in the lipid category, but your body makes all the cholesterol it needs. Every cell of your body can make cholesterol because it's so essential, and the liver makes the most. So if you never ate an ounce of flesh in your entire lifetime, you would produce exactly the range of cholesterol like my level is. My levels stay between 120 and 140, and my triglycerides, as I've already mentioned, stay really good. My LDL stay under 60. Anything over 95 is dangerous. So Pritikin always said your cholesterol should be 100 plus your age and not over 160. So you really want that range. And so it's interesting because when you sustain these good levels, if you have excess amount of cholesterol, hypercholesterolemia, you start forming lipolasmas, these like pimples of cholesterol. You form cholesterol arcus canealis, like in the lens of the eye. You can see in the white, right where the white part meets the color part of the eye. If you take a mirror, look into your own eye, you can see this arc of cholesterol. You form cholesterol first in the male organ. So that's why so many men have ED, erectile dysfunction, because they've eaten so much cholesterol. I did leading up to when I was 21 years old. Here's a picture of what I looked like back before I had my first TIA or stroke. Can you see that picture?
Yeah. Wow.
And here I'm holding in my picture, and here's 6 months later, the same individual.
Oh, wow. That's so much better.
And that was after working with Nathan Pritikin.
That is amazing. So before we transition and talk about hormones, let's just conclude, for someone who wants to prevent or reverse Alzheimer's or other brain disorders, what type of diet would you recommend?
Okay. In the book by Dr. Bob Goldman and Ronald Klatz, they wrote a book on brain function. And in there, they cited a study about a group of Trappist monks and Benedictine monks. And then they referred to the nun study. And what they discovered was, almost without exception, the groups of nuns and monks far away from stress. So you can separate out because their meals are taken care of. They're not in a stressful lifestyle. They're meditating. They're praying. These individuals, without exception, on an animal-based diet, cheese, fish, chicken, and yes, fish and chicken has as much cholesterol as red meat. Every time I say that, people are shocked. What? I never heard that tuna packed in water has more cholesterol than red meat. It absolutely does. You look at nutrition facts and you look up the USDA listings, it does. 70 milligrams versus 60 for red meat. So the point is that when you have this amount of cholesterol coming into the body, into the bloodstream, it's above and beyond what the body already produces, and the excess will go into the brain arteries, and it causes multiple small strokes. I had my first TIA like John McDougall did when he was 21. I was 21, and I used to eat 12 eggs a day to play American football. I'd eat a lot of cheese and meat, trying to bulk up, and I clogged my arteries. And so I realized that I had to go on a very important transition in my life, to go on a plant-based, oil-free, sugar-free diet. Now, it's interesting that those with poor brain cognition, that not only do the blood vessels to the male organ cause ED, which is a canary in the mind that's a warning that you're at risk for cardiovascular disease, the secondary factor is clogged arteries to the brain. One of the leading causes, people don't know this, but Dr. Alzheimer's himself stated that those with the high cholesterol level, particularly LDL over 95, had the highest rate of Alzheimer's and dementia associated with poor circulation to the brain. Those on a plant-based diet, the nuns, the Trappist monks, these individuals, their brain function remained excellent throughout their life. They rarely ever developed a stroke. So the incidence of stroke and dementia and Alzheimer's, as mentioned by Alzheimer's, who did autopsies on those on an animal-based diet, he found an alarming correlation to an animal-based diet, high cholesterol, and plaques that led to Alzheimer's. Those on a plant-based diet, they had little or no plaques, and they maintained their brain function throughout their life. So that's number one, get the cholesterol down. Number two, get the triglycerides down, because triglycerides, within hours, you could be a plant-based Indian, plant-based individual eating plant-based your whole life. But if you're taking in gobs of oil to this negative point that people are making, I got to have a lot of oil. All these Brian Johnson longevity guys say, selling olive oil, by the way. And the other guy, who's the lectin guy that's promoting olive oil too. He said that he worked with Tony Robbins and stuff. Yeah.
Well, you've worked with Tony Robbins. I know who you're talking about. I can't remember his name offhand.
Yeah. So point is, these guys are, how shall I say, promoting and selling olive oil, right?
Right.
And it is not a health promoting thing. Eating olives, the fiber will slow absorption of fat, and you won't get clumping of the blood. I've seen people eat olives, small amounts of avocados, coconut, walnuts, nuts, and seeds. So to that point, I know Caldwell Esselstyn will tell you, no nuts, no seeds, no avocados, no olives. But that's in the early stage where you're trying to reverse cardiovascular disease. And he, in a private interview I did with him, and I released it on YouTube, and that was, he said, look, I do admit a small amount, less than a handful of nuts, seeds, avocados, olives is okay. But when you give people permission, especially salted nuts and seeds, they eat a whole bag full. He said, no one just stops at a handful of nuts or seeds. McDougall said the same thing. So we all agree, though, you need those essential fatty acids. It's okay to eat them in small quantities. It's the dose related and how it's concentrated, the excess oil, that causes this toxic effect to the brain.
Rory, I find it amazing. I went to a lecture about a year ago with Brian Johnson, and he bragged about how every single thing he does, he tests. He tests his metabolic profile. He tests his aging. So I asked him, when you added olive oil to your diet, did you do those tests? And I give him a lot of credit. He said no. So I don't.
Let him come into my studio. Let's do like I did. Chef AJ once saw and learned about me because I had produced a video, is olive oil safe? And I did a show where I did my blood under the microscope, and I showed my blood separating clean. I did my triglycerides on my Cholestec machine right here, and I measured it to be exceedingly perfect. I showed my microscope test. My blood cells were all separated. And then I drank a glass of olive oil. And within 4 hours, as I predicted, and the title of that show actually was How to Become Diabetic in 6 Hours. And I was able to induce diabetes in my own bloodstream within 6 hours by eating and drinking olive oil. And right. Stephen
Gundry. Yeah. Gundry's the doctor who we were referring to earlier. But let me ask you this, because people are going to say, oh, that's because the olive oil you were drinking wasn't high quality. I've seen the studies. It doesn't matter the quality of the olive oil. It's all oil. And our bodies, our blood cells react the same way to oil.
Yeah. I do this little video blip where I take, I'll take sugar or salt and I'll pour it on my hand, and then I turn it upside down and it falls. Then I take a drop of olive oil, extra virgin olive oil. I buy it from Brian Johnson or Stephen Gundry. I put the oil, I sprinkle some sugar and some salt, and I turn my hand, and the sugar and salt sticks to my hand. It will not come down. On the head of a pin, there's 8 million red blood cells at the head of a pin. So when that oil rolls into your bloodstream, it coats all of the red blood cells. And when they touch each other, they stick together. So when they come to the smallest capillaries, they can't squeeze through, and it causes backflow and edema, and all the fluids go to the surrounding tissues, and you have Rouleau. You reduce blood flow and oxygen to the brain by 30% within 4 hours of consuming excess oil. And it sits there. I proved on my experiment. I'll show the video. They go to my YouTube channel, How to Become Diabetic in 6 Hours. And you will see that I was unconscious during a period during the filming because I'm not used to that load of fat that decreased oxygen in my brain. I literally kind of passed out during the videotaping.
Wow. And it's not just oil, it's any type of fat. As Dr. McDougall said, the fat you eat is the fat you wear. And it's been proven you can do fat biopsies on people and figure out what they've actually been eating, because what you eat is what you are. It becomes part of you.
To your point, I did a pleasant experiment where Lee Shackley of Shackley Vitamins, if you remember Amway and Shackley, Shackley was a competitive vitamin company. And Lee Shackley had employed me to help him with his own health. And I did remarkable things for him. I did stem cells, peptides, bioidentical hormones. I put him on a whole foods diet. And then he turned to me after several weeks of feeling incredible. And he said, "Can you help my wife?" And I said, "What's going on?" He said, "She has stage 4 Alzheimer's and she's in an Orange facility. And all the doctors have given up on her." And I said, "Well, sure, let me go meet her." And I went to Orange, California, and I showed up, and here's a beautiful, nice woman, and she's literally sitting in a wheelchair and like this, drooling, and just stage 4. She's gone, completely gone. And I so I talk to the dietitian staff. I find out what she's eating. I talk to the medical doctor and I said, listen, we're going to do a simple thing. We're going to put her on bioidentical hormones. I'm going to bring a whole body vibration plate. We're going to get her standing up out in the sun to get vitamin D. We're going to put her on peptides. We're going to do stem cells. And he looks at me like I was some alien. And he goes, do you not understand? She has stage 4 Alzheimer's. There's not a thing you can do. Why would you even waste anyone's time? Why would you waste Mr. Shackley's money? And he said, just leave. There's nothing you can do for this lady. I said, okay. I go to Lee Shackley directly. I said word for word what the medical doctor told me at the care center. Nice doctor, but he had never seen anything because all of his other patients looked the same way. And I said, Lee, I think I can help her. He said, then fire the doctor, bring your own doctor in. I did. I brought in S.A. Goslin, who started IV treatment centers in LA. He just retired this last year, and he retells the story really well because he never forgot how he and I show up. We meet the patient because a medical doctor has to see their patient before they're prescribing things. I'm not prescribing things. I've never claimed to be an MD or prescribing. I'm a PhD. I'm an American Board of Anti-Aging Health Practitioners. I'm board certified in 4 disciplines: regenerative medicine, anti-aging medicine, lifestyle medicine, and functional medicine. What more is there, right? That's the most important interventions you could do from a medical perspective, right?
Right.
So that's why the doctors around the world love me, because I tell them openly exactly what they need to do. Let's help you tail down off your medications. By the way, Cleves Bennett wrote a book, How to Get Off Your Blood Pressure Medications in 12 Weeks. It's on my shelf here. And he worked at the Pritikin Institute. So he would say how these patients are put on blood pressure medications. That's another cause of brain fog. These blood pressure medications lower their blood pressure without getting the cause of the problem. Now they have other problems, accelerating atherosclerosis on blood pressure medications. Okay. So point was, I go ahead, I meet with a dietitian at Lee Shackley wife's facility, and she looks at me and she goes, she won't eat those foods. And I said, what do you mean? She's stage 4. She won't even know she's eating these foods. So they were feeding her lasagna with cheese and greasy burgers and eggs and bacon and hot dogs and all of these things. So I said, look, here, I go, and here I'm trying to find my book here. I gave her this cookbook at the time. It's called the Zero Cholesterol Weight Loss Cookbook. And I gave it to the dietitian. And I said, look, I want you to put her on only these recipes. So she turned to the doctor. My doctor's there. And he said, you must do this. This is in her charts. You are absolutely required. So the RD followed the recipes, prepared the foods. She started eating these foods on a daily basis. We brought in a whole body vibration plate. We had staff hold her up because she was so weak, because she atrophied and she couldn't even hardly walk or think. And we'd hold her up out in the sun and on the whole body vibration plate. And then I took her in at that time for stem cell treatment. And people say, well, wait a minute, stem cells aren't legal. Well, you know what? A doctor has the ability to write off-label certain interventions where it's appropriate. And we intervened, did stem cell treatment for cord blood stem cells, by the way, with Warren's jelly, exosomes. It has CD134. And I guarantee you, it was one of the remarkable changes I saw in both Lee Shackley and her. And then I put her on a series of bioidentical hormones. I would rub creams on her that is the forerunner to one of our products called Anabolic MD. It has pregnenolone, DHEA. It has anabolic androgens. And then I'll sometimes mix a little androgel in there for the added testosterone. And it's got chrysin to clear out harmful estrogens. So there's 4 hormones in one balance. And we just rub it on her skin. Right around the neck is where most of the blood vessels are. And so it would absorb these hormones. You could just see her come to life. It was like a light bulb went off. She started looking around and she started to talk to the staff. And they're like, what's going on? Here's this lady that was stage 4. She's communicating with her husband, Lee Shackley, who shows up at the care facility. All these things within weeks, not years, within weeks, the brain fog clearing up because now blood flow is getting to her brain because we corrected her diet. We got her exercising. We got her on bioidentical hormones. You give a woman testosterone. A woman needs testosterone as much as a man, and in some cases more, because that hormone helps with brain cognition. We then
right. But to be clear, the amount of testosterone an average woman will need might be less than an average man.
Yeah, men need 10 times more
Yeah.
testosterone than women. And we've done some pellets with women, but they don't do well. They do better with creams because you can kind of manage it better. And so we also used Estroblock cream, which has estrol, progesterone. And so this is a natural inhibitor of aromatase inhibitor, right? So instead of converting testosterone to estrogen, most of it will stay as testosterone. And so now we have these latest peptides, RegenMax. So this is BPC 157, TB4, which helps the body to heal and the brain to heal. And we have something called Thyroid Plus, because their thyroid's really important for recovery from brain disorders, right? And we have a few other things. So we have something called Mental Mend. And this is something I'm going to be showing at the A4M convention. And I'm really excited about it because the peptides involved with that. And if you've heard of the use of here, let me just show you this. It's got NAD. It's got the use of here. Give me a moment. Energy focus. So it's got alpha, GPK. It's got NADH. It's got L-theanine. So each of these products, and then here's the other one that I'm really excited about. So we are using these oral peptides and injectable peptides. And of course, My Body, My Research, Brain Builder has cerebral lysin. Have you ever used that hormone, cerebral lysin peptide?
Yes, I'm a fan, but let's actually talk about cerebral lysin a little bit.
Okay.
So you got cerebral lysin. What's the name of the product you just showed?
It's called Brain Builder.
Brain Builder. Okay. Yeah. So cerebral lysin is used commonly in Europe to regenerate the brain after trauma. It's a lot harder to get it in this country, but it sounds like you found a source. So.
Yeah.
Wow.
You know me, if tell me you can't do it and I'm going to figure out, like, I break world records. Tell me I can't do it and I'll find a way to do it.
But let's go back to the example you were giving. So you had someone with advanced stage 4 Alzheimer's who it sounds like you were able to help regenerate her brain. Now, it took help, right? She wasn't able to do this herself. It sounded like she needed a team to get her on the vibration plate, and to get her the right food. But it sounds like you got a good result with her. Is that true?
Very affordable and doable, to the point where she actually requested her limo that she recalled pull up, take her to Fashion Island. And she went to the storekeepers and recalled each storekeeper by name and their original conversations. That's the turnaround from stage 4, drooling, completely out of it, to so functional that she knew exactly what she was doing, who she was communicating with. And it was like Lee Shackley thought this was the greatest miracle he'd ever seen. He referred me to his grandchildren, his children. I became, their health mentor, if you will, much like Nathan Pritikin, right? I'm one of these people who I want the world to know, but it sometimes starts with a key person that is very influential and opens the door and the opportunity to make a transition and a dramatic change.
Wow. So I think that's the most important message, is that there's hope.
Yes.
Even if you have advanced Alzheimer's or other brain degeneration, there is still hope. There are many things you can try. Now, to be sure, it probably took longer to reverse her condition.
Oh, yeah, months.
Than, say, to prevent someone who doesn't have a condition yet.
Yeah, it did take months. To me, it seemed like a very short time period because, I'm always progressively out going to conferences and learning and studying and researching. And I was trying to figure out how, because I went to India and China and Japan, and they were doing some scaffolding and actually drilling into the brain and injecting stem cells. And I was like, oh, that seems too complex. I just don't see where we can do that kind of work. And so we started looking at just simply injecting cord blood stem cells into the buttocks, and they would just then go throughout the body and seek the areas and cross the blood-brain barrier, particularly the MSCs, these very small cells that are inherent within cord blood stem cells that could help heal the brain.
Wow. So let's transition and talk more about hormone restoration. So in the example you just gave, did you measure her hormone levels, or did you just give, or how does that normally work?
No, it's got to the point where anyone, I'll reveal my age. I'm turning 71 January 5th. So When I measure people's blood of my age, right, my decade of age, seventh decade, some of my clients are 80 and 90 years old. They have almost no testosterone. Their DHEA levels tanked into the ground. Their pregnenolone, which is one of the most important brain function that Jonathan Wright, also one of the great grandfathers of all of hormone therapy, will tell you it's critical for optimum brain function. So all these key hormones, including, I know there's a debate amongst the plant-based community. They're afraid of IGF-1. They're afraid of insulin-like growth factor and growth hormone. But when you use peptides, that's one of the keys to restoring the brain. I'm a big fan of testosterone, CJC 1295. I use these hormones. And then for my seniors, I give them PT 141 to restore sexual function, because people 70, 80, I know when I was in my 20s, 30s, and 40s, oh, come on, grandpas don't have sex, do they? Grandmas don't have sex. It's one of the signs if you're going to live longer. The longest lived people in the world, according to Terry Hertog, are still able to engage in intimate function, mostly because in the blue zones, they're still on plant-based diets. They can still maintain and achieve sexual erection and engage in intercourse. So I think, to me, a sign where they're no longer able to be sexually active, I put them on various peptides, including PT141 injectable. And then we have a peptide I call Aroused Passion that has MK677 that also orally stimulates the IGF through the growth hormone pathway. And I think this is one of the great ways to restore brain function. You get deeper quality sleep. And you and I know sleep's one of the keys to restoring health and brain function.
Agreed. So let's slow down and try to analyze this. So you just mentioned maybe a dozen different peptides, maybe 8 or 10 different hormones. Are you making all these changes all at once, or is it structured one step at a time, or does it depend? What is your approach normally?
In my early days, I was doing a lot of research 47 years ago, and I would test each individual herb, each individual hormone, whether it be cream introduction or injection or pellets, and I would independently study each of these individual variables, not just on myself, but a lot of my willing clients. And so over the course of time, I had tested literally thousands of people. When I go to a Tony Robbins event, he'd give me 1,000 people to test before, after 9 days of putting on a plant-based whole foods diet, and the miracles would occur. Their triglycerides, cholesterol would come down 40, 50%, much like better than the drug statins without the side effects. We would just use the cookbook. They would prepare gourmet style foods, just like I did for the registered dietitian for Miss Shackley. We would put 1,000 people on it. And in 9 days, I published studies in my original book, Grow Young and Slim, of how you could reverse cardiovascular disease, diabetes, heart disease, high blood pressure, improve brain function. And you'd only lose 2-3 pounds. So it was really independent of weight loss, because over the time I would follow up with these people 5 years, 10 years, 20 years later. I have a client who comes to me to this day, Michael Ginsberg. He's been on my program for 46 years. Phyllis, his wife, came to me when I was teaching 6 weekly classes. And in 6 weeks, we put them all on a plant-based whole foods diet. And same with Tony Robbins and all their graduates. So I have all these data points. So now I hit it with everything in the kitchen sink. If their budget will allow, and it's not tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars. If you go to Colombia and you do stem cells, you spend all this medical tourism and it's a big hook. They're great marketers. It may help, but all I can tell you is we're doing the best work in the world here in the U.S. And I always defer to you, Dr. Joshua Hellman, because you're one of the greats that understands the complexity of the brain, the complexity of the human body, that no single intervention is going to work. You're only strong as your weakest links. So if we hit it with everything in the kitchen sink, maybe you lean into X amount of dollars. We always reveal what it's going to be. It's just not insurance covered kind of thing. And so people will avail themselves. Right now, my 91-year-old mother is using QRS, which is pulse electromagnetic frequency. Every night, she turns it on when she wakes up in the middle of the night, about 5 times a night to go use a restroom, and she turns it on for about 20 minutes and sleeps on this mat. She noticed some pain in the back of her neck went away. It's like, oh, wow, that's cool. There's a 300% increase in circulation to the brain and the body using this QRS developed by Dr. Fisher out of Germany. So there's other companies out there marketing their devices. This is just the favorite one I like. If you know Jake Paul, he recently bought one from my colleague, Ibaki Baculus. And Ebach says he's the longevity coach to Jake Paul, who's about to have one of the biggest fights of his life in the heavyweight division. And he's not even a pro boxer, but he's about to enter the ring with a professional pro, not, a retired pro like Mike Tyson, who came out. By the way, Mike Tyson was using my product Ester Block and called me about a plant-based diet years ago, and he transitioned to a plant-based diet. He's now since gone to more of an animal diet. But point is, you can get these results by hitting it from all angles. So if you want to see results, I can't then tease out which it was, because it's usually a synergistic effect. If you want to be scientific and spend another 20 years while you're, kind of out of it and wait and see what will work, then you could do that. I just tell people we're going to hit it with everything. And so long as your budget allows for, a QRS bed's like about $4,000. There's nothing that's like more than you'd spend for Botox or buying coffee every day at Starbucks, which, by the way, caffeine has an interesting effect. I have a product called Powered Speed that I used with Lee Shackley's wife, and it kind of brought her brain back, because we were using natural caffeine like guarana and some of these different things that I think cordyceps. I think these herbs are pretty good, but used judiciously. I don't like coffee itself because it has too many other chemicals in it. There's molds, there's other issues Dave Asprey and these guys are selling. I love those guys. They're great marketers, but I'd rather a pure form. So that's what we use.
So when it comes to caffeine, I agree. Short term, caffeine will improve brain performance. The problem is long term, it will cause you have to go higher doses, and it doesn't work as well. And there's some studies showing you get decreased brain function in the frontal lobe. So that's the challenge, is that people become addicted to caffeine or other stimulants.
Agreed. I personally don't drink coffee at all. Even green tea's too strong for me. I don't metabolize caffeine very well. So I use a more elegant introduction called adrenal DMG. Dimethylglycine was described by Dr. Rimland to help autistic children. One of my original missions was to help autistic children around the world. So we saw some remarkable results with these methylators that would help methylate over 1 million chemical reactions per second that the body needs. So adrenal helps support the adrenals, the cortisol. It brings balance. It helps with caprylic acid target, fungal forms. So this is a great immune enhancer. And to me, it's one of the nice, elegant ways to help brain function without overstimulating the brain.
Right. And you mentioned QRS. QRS is a part of PEMF, pulse electrical magnetic frequency, that opens up the microcirculation, the capillaries, and the lymphatics. There's no question it can help with the microcirculation. Going back to hormones, so from a scientific point, you could do one at a time, but in practice, if you're trying to reverse, you're basically putting them all in at the same time. Can you give us that list again? Which hormones? You mentioned DHEA. Which are the other ones that you will commonly supplement?
Just so you know, too, I'm a big fan when a patient comes to me and client and they have their lab work done. Quite often, their doctors don't know the range of tests that should be done. So much like the Europeans, Dr. Terry Hertog, I run a 24-hour urine test and check 38 different hormones. So I look at the cortisol metabolites, I look at the androgen metabolites, the estrogen metabolites, I look at human growth hormone in urine. And so it's kind of like an orchestra. I'm looking to balance all the hormones as properly as possible. That's why I like to use these transdermal creams. I use a new product that just came that's in the 3rd generation into our office here this week. It's called Testro More. And that Testro More product is really good because it increases the bioavailable free form of testosterone. And I think that's a key to Parkinson's and some other brain disorders, because that cognition needs that testosterone. Some of the most important organs that have a lot of testosterone receptors is the heart, and the brain needs testosterone receptors.
Right. As I was going to say, and also testosterone can optimize your immune function, and your immune function in your brain is critical too.
Absolutely. So I like to use DHEA in very low amounts if it's in a capsule form, somewhere around not more than 25 milligrams, but I will use DHEA in a transdermal cream because DHEA will tend to stay as DHEA when it goes in for a man, and for a woman, DHEA will tend to convert if it's orally into testosterone. And and in men, DHEA will turn into estrogen. So you kind of want that ratio difference. So I like to use a little bit of oral DHEA if their levels are low in both the blood and the urine. And then I use a transdermal DHEA as well, along with pregnenolone, because I want that brain function. Dr. Mark Gordon is really big with traumatic brain injury, and he talks a lot about his favorite hormone. If you pin him down, says, if you could only take one, what would it be? He always says pregnenolone. He says it's one of the keys to brain function and restoration.
I agree with him there. So you've got DHEA, you've got pregnenolone, you mentioned testosterone. Did you talk about estradiol?
Estradiol is an interesting thing because I think when women are young and men, especially women, they have more estriol than they do estradiol. So when talking to Dr. Terry Grossman out of Colorado, he'll say he's kind of changed his opinion about estrogen replacement. He prefers to use testosterone, let it aromatize over into estrogen, and he gets a little bit more elegant bounce, because the most dominant hormone in a female is not estrogen by the nomenclature of nanogram and deciliters. It's actually testosterone. So it's not as high as men, but women really require testosterone. That's why so many women have Alzheimer's. I think a higher percentage of women suffer from brain dementia and Alzheimer's, possibly than men. I'm not sure what the statistics are in recent.
It's 2 to 1. Twice as many women as men get Alzheimer's in this country.
Okay. So the first thing I notice, you bring the light bulbs back on when you're starting to optimize their testosterone, let a little bit aromatize over into estrogen, which invariably there's about 50 to 100 different estrogens. And that's where you pick them in downstream estrogen metabolites. So I'm a fan of not just spot urinary, like one of the labs out there that does it. I kind of like the 24-hour level that Terry Hertog utilizes in Europe.
It makes sense. So how about in men? Do you ever use estradiol in men?
I use a little bit of estriol for men. And again, defaulting back to, I don't want so much of it to become estrone. I suspect there's problems with 16-alpha hydroxyestrone. So I have a new book coming out about estrogen dominance and how animal product is one of the biggest contributors to excess estrogen within men and women. And it's not the good kind of estrogen either. It's much more toxic and probably problematic. I think there's a suspect that Mark Rosenthal states in his cancer programs that he says that he thinks that estrogen is present in almost every type of cancer, but particularly the bad kind of estrogen. So we want good estrogens. We don't want much of the bad. So we want to metabolize them. So that's why I'm a big fan of calcium diglucarate, DIM, diethylmethane, indole-3-carbinol. It's essentially, they come from cruciferous vegetables, and also sulforaphane. I'm really a big fan of broccoli sprouts. So I use that in a product I call Estrablock. That's our number one seller in the whole world. Everyone who knows anything about it, we sell more of this on Amazon than any product that I've ever created.
How about using progesterone in women?
I like a little bit of progesterone. I don't think, I know Dr. David Zava and John Lee, they wrote a book originally about progesterone was the big savior, but progesterone has its own metabolites. I would not depend only on progesterone, but I do use very small amounts in a product I call Estrablock, because that progesterone ratio, especially if they're getting hot flashes, you can use progesterone at night and in the morning. And I think reasonably that's a good way to go. I'm not a big fan of the synthetic progesterones, progestins and things. I think you're better off with the bioidentical.
Wow. So switching gears and talking about peptides again, you mentioned maybe a dozen. Are you normally starting with a dozen different peptides in someone who has brain concerns, or not so much?
I cycle them. Say, for example, I'll start them on tesamorelin, because that's going to elegantly get them deeper quality sleep. It's going to help brain function. So we inject very small amounts. Everything I do with peptides is almost what I would categorize as microdosing. I'm not a fan of very high dosaging and stepping the levels up. I'm also a fan of cycling. So I'll use tesamorelin for a month or two. They'll start a vial. They'll inject a tiny amount just under the skin. You hardly feel it. It's like a little insulin needle. I have an online course that demonstrates how to do it. And then I'll switch over to CJC 1295. I'll go to epinephrine. I'll go to sermorelin, GHRP2, GHRP6. So I just think that each of them have their unique stimuluses, because the body has over 700,000 peptides that we depend on. And as we get older, these peptides, like bioidentical hormones, decline. And we believe these are signalers to help the body's hormones adjust to more optimum levels than just trying to only use the bioidentical hormone. Although I'm a fan of using bioidentical hormones, I like to use the peptides. I've been using them for over 45 years. I like to use them. This is an oral peptide, a bioregulator that stimulates human growth hormone and IGF. And so each of these things has its place. So I kind of cycle them. Oxytocin, if they want to have that feeling of love. My biggest favorite personally at my age is PT141, because I'm still of dating age, and I'll be of dating age till the day I die. If I'm not still dating at 100 years of age, you're going to have to say, Dr. Nick, what's going on, man? Are you not taking your PT141? Are you not using your Maury? Nathan Bryant comes up to me and he buys a Maury V from me. So that's got to tell you, he's a pretty sharp nitric oxide guy, and he knows my products work.
Yeah, he's been a guest on my show, a popular episode. So when you say cycle, do you mean on for a week, off for a week? What do you mean by cycling?
No, I'll go, like a vial will last about a month and a half, depending on use and the size of the individual and so forth. But I'll have them go through a whole vial. And in those cases, they'll inject 3-4 times a week. Sometimes, depending on the hormone, like in the case of PT141, I might want to have intimacy 4 days a week. My girlfriend's out of town or she's in town. So I'll use that 4 days a week, 5 days a week. But then there's times, I'm just busy with my work and everything and no girlfriend, so I don't use it. So with most peptides, I kind of use them as need. Unless I have an injury, then BPC 157, TB4, then I'll be injecting that as long as it takes to get rid of the acute injury and start to heal.
What about for someone who's got brain issues, dementia, Alzheimer's, things like that? How long would you cycle on for, or would it vary case to case?
It's interesting. Dr. Seed, he was one of the early teachers at A4M on peptides, and I've been attending his courses and reviewing his documents in his book. And I tend to agree with him. I think that it's a really good idea to maybe use a particular peptide for maybe a couple months, and it's okay to use. I don't think you have to be redundant. If you're using one that releases growth hormone, for example, there's a category of about 5 peptides that rattled off that I alter those, like I'll use one for a month or two, then switch over to the next one for a month or two and the next one for a month or two. And then I'll cycle back over. Sometimes I'll give the body a break. Sometimes we just don't use it. Like on the weekend, we'll use it during the week when we need it most. So I think it's not so much use it. The only one that comes close to what you just said is epithalin. Epithalin you'll use for about 20 straight days once a year, and it resets the pineal gland and helps to release melatonin at a proper levels. It's the only one I know of that you can use that infrequent and still kind of get that circadian rhythm benefit of melatonin and deep quality sleep.
Wow. Okay, so we've talked about peptides. You hinted about stem cells. Tell me your take on stem cells, how you recommend delivering it, especially for someone with who's worried about their brain.
Yeah, I was one of the early pioneers in stem cell research. I wrote this book for physicians only, and I reviewed the literature around the world, particularly because, full disclosure, I have a son that was, I'll just say, damaged at birth due to Rh factor. They injected in the womb. And I won't say the substance, but it's a very common substance that everyone was doing. And it caused too much mercury and it caused brain damage. So he suffered from Asperger's, very extreme, inaudible. And so I was searching the world for answers, and I found different therapies and interventions. And one was stem cells. I'm thinking, if it'll help cerebral palsy children with brain damage, that maybe the same cord blood stem cells could be helping autistic children. So I helped Mercedes Jones' son, who was afflicted with Asperger's, a very serious form. And we did stem cells on him. We did a couple different injection series. We did some peptides with him. We did PEMF, QRS, Matt. We did various things as monitored by my microscope and lab work. And I was working with a medical doctor. So I don't do these things on my own. I'm always working with some practitioner like yourself. And so that being said, I think the beauty of peptides is you have to kind of be very sensitive to your body, and your practitioner needs to observe, and you got a full disclosure. Hey, I had a problem with that particular peptide. What happened? Well, tell me. Then you look up and see what is that a possible side effect. For example, the GLP-1s, these are incredible in microdosing. You got to be careful though. I recently had a client who was drinking coffee and using GLP, and then they started vomiting and they had nausea and fainting. And I'm like, oh, what's going on? And I looked up the literature. You can't be drinking coffee and using GLPs, because so many people, it can cause serious dehydration, for example. So you get dehydrated, that's not good for the brain. It's not good for function. It'll cause nausea. And so we had to take her off, that treatment, even though she was only using it once a week.
Wow. And what about exosomes? Do you ever recommend exosomes for the brain?
I think exosomes are incredible. Back to your original question about stem cells, I've been working with a particular group who has perfected the way of taking whole cord blood, the way they're introduced, making sure they're purified, and they're the richest source of exosomes. We measured over 2 billion exosomes in each vial. We've measured the presence of MSC, mu cells. We've measured we add a little Wharton's jelly because that's part of the whole healing effect, and CD134. So there's one textbook I know of that talks about these whole cord blood interventions, and he's the same doctor I've worked with for nearly 30 years. So this is where we were helping kids with cerebral palsy, autism, brain dysfunction, and I just think it's so underspoken about. It's one of the greatest potentials to help people with cognitive disorders and brain function, and I think everyone should behoove themselves of this intervention. That is the proper cord blood stem cells. Right now, I'm on the fence about fat-derived stem cells. I know Dr. Loeb has professed they can be of great benefit. I think he's a smart guy. I'm waiting to do an intervention with him because I had some interventions myself with fat-derived stem cells, and they were not a good result. I won't go into detail on it. So I'm waiting for him to show me the science, and even I don't mind being a guinea pig. We'll test on me. Do they work or do they not? They either work or they don't. So I've had some pretty serious sports injuries because I'm still competing. I'm a little bit wild competing in an extreme sport beyond kettlebells. It's like curl and press. Point is, I occasionally get injuries. I fell on my motorcycle last July, and I did these cord blood stem cells within a week of that injury. And I somehow recovered from an injury that I don't think I was going to recover from. I also did therapeutic plasma exchange, which we haven't talked about, and my blood looked immaculate. Before I tested, I had a lot of free radical damage, just a matter of living and this oxidative stress. And within a day of having that procedure, it cleared up my blood. So it's removing 96% of toxins. Dr. Kiproff pioneered this. Dr. Paul Savage does it. Dr. Phil Milgram. Are you doing anything with TPE?
I'm doing using TPE in one of my clinics in South Florida with Alzheimer's patients and having amazing results.
Wow. Love it.
Yeah. So
I love it. Okay.
And I love that once the word gets out that this works, everyone's doing it.
You can't ignore the science, and particularly the clinical results. When you see a remarkable result, and to your point, you could do any one of these therapies you and I have talked about, and most people are probably going to notice an improvement. When you have a seriously stage 4 and the person's barely functioning, you got to hit it with everything in the kitchen sink and see if we can restore this person. Some of my docs will give up on it, said, this person's too far gone. You've waited too long. I'm sorry. I can't help you to work with you on it. And I'm making my next phone call. Hey, doc, I got another doc on the line. Can you help me with this patient? This patient's not well. I'm not going to tell you it's going to be easy. And the patient family has given us permission. Let's jump in with everything in kitchen sink. And some of the guys will jump in, and we seem like with Miss Shackley, we've seen some remarkable turnarounds.
Right. And I think it's a lot about attitude. Are the doctors like you and me who are seeking out the latest cutting edge technologies, or are you just relying on the standard things you may have learned 30 years ago when you were in your medical training? So
I'm like you. I'm updating my PowerPoints, my talks, my Google Slides, my books, up to the moment I'm releasing them. And I'm at this phase now where I'm trying to release my Audible books now, and with a little help of AI, because there's so much information coming out so quickly. The best way you and I have of testing these things out is having our people use proven scientifically validated methods. And then, hey, if you don't mind, let's add this added intervention and let's see if it helps. And if it does, we're savvy enough and 40 plus years in working with clients and patients to see that, hey, I think what these other therapies would have got them this far, but that added peptide, that added stem cell treatment, that added therapeutic plasma exchange, I think it made all the difference in the world, right?
Totally. And what we've talked about the history, what new technologies beyond what you've already mentioned excite you the most, saying, coming out in the next 6 months to a year?
I was talking to Ron Rothenberg, one of my favorite. He and I lectured around the world. I
Right.
think he's north of me by several years too. He and I would go surfing out in Hawaii, and
Wow.
we're good friends. And I remember he would come up to me, and I told him about, because we're both young enough to be dating. I say young enough, he's 70, 80 years old, right? We date, and I told him about PT 141. He ignored me a little bit, and then he shows up with this nice tan. I go, Ron, are you using PT 141? Because the side effect benefit is getting a nice tan, right? And he kind of bit this big Cheshire cat smile. He's got that kind of smile if you've ever met Ron Rothenberg, right? And he said, look, I'm working on mitochondria right now. That's the latest thing. I'm just after mitochondria. But there are certain stem cell interventions. There's cyclic variations in adaptive conditioning, which I think is a notch above hyperbaric oxygen. So that's a huge thing that some of the athletes and celebrities are using. I jump in that tank for recovery. It releases EPO, erythropoietin, as if you inject it. That's a very expensive ingredient that these long distance bicyclers use. So I use a lot of fitness modalities. I think fitness is underreported in terms of its ability to restore brain function and cognitive function, because without physicality, you can do all the treatments you want in a person laying in a bed, and they're not going to get too well. But I was one of the first to go to Midwood Community Hospital and Stanton Community Hospital, and we were doing all these treatments, but I had the nurses getting the heart patients up and walking up and down the aisles, and some of the doctors were going, what are you doing? What are you doing? This is not safe. Bed rest is what I ordered. I said, bed rest? That's outdated. You got to get them moving if you're going to save their life, right? So I think that, to your point, what I'm most excited about is using what's called a vibra massage. I have a pro version and a portable version. We've been using on athletes, and we kind of rub it on their body to the sore points and all this inflammation. It works through it. I did it for Brian Tracy. I had Dr. James Stockton come in, and it turned him around. He was almost like necrotic tissue, and he could barely walk, and he had neuropathy and all these things. And then we combined that with some other treatments. We did TPE for, let me correct myself. We actually we did NAD treatment for him too, which I'm a big fan of NAD, which is a peptide, by the way. You can inject NAD. We get 1,000 milligram vials, and you can inject, say, 100 milligrams a day. You don't have to just do the IV, by the way, with NAD. Did you know that?
Sure. And it turns out that NAD, it's a nucleic acid derivative. It's technically not a peptide.
Okay.
A peptide is an amino acid. So,
right.
But you're right. It's a small molecule.
Yeah. So I guess the key to your point is, right now you're using a Neuro sit, and it improves posture, and you can't put it on a soft chair like I'm sitting on right now. And also I love this Tesla Max. I hooked up Lee Shackley's wife to this, and you hook up the electrodes to the weakened muscle groups. So I did this for my own father, who was suffering from dementia. And at the end stage of life, the family let me intervene. And I did all the things I did for Lee Shackley's. And then we bought a blender and a crock pot. We were serving him all the whole foods. I was rubbing bioidentical creams on him. We were doing peptides and the Tesla Max. And he was physically almost unable to get up. And we worked on my father, who at that time was in his mid 80s. And we stimulated the muscles, and you keep changing the electrodes to the 7 different key muscle groups. And we brought him to the point where he could finally stand up. He could finally walk, which I think was a breakthrough, because you take an Alzheimer's or dementia patient, and if they're ambulatory, you're really not getting to the origin of how you can maybe restore and recovery and bring this patient back to life, right?
Totally. Dr. Nick, we've covered so many different topics. How would you sum this up for someone out there, either for themselves or a family member with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS, or just wants to prevent brain degeneration or dementia? How would you summarize? Because we've covered so many different topics. How would you put it all together?
I consider what I call the 7 pillars of health that's written about in my book, Stop Aging Now. You can find it on Amazon, stopagingnowbook.com. But I didn't get into clarity about Rebecca Glazier, who has been taking testosterone pellets in Parkinson's patients and injecting those testosterone pellets into men and women, particularly in men. And I've seen people literally overcome most of the symptoms of Parkinson's by just using testosterone pellets. So one of the first things I always look at, if your testosterone is that of a 50, 60, 70, 80-year-old or 90-year-old, some of the oldest patients I've done it in 80 and 90-year-olds, including my father, testosterone pellets are a miracle. My father was completely just lost the interest in life. He could barely talk. You could barely understand him. He was on multiple heart medications and blood pressure medications, prostate medications. So I convinced his doctor to get him off all the medications only so that I could prove that using a plant-based whole food, oil-free diet, sugar-free diet, and that I could show by using the bioidentical hormones and giving him testosterone pellets and using peptides, oral and injectable peptides, and then using the most advanced type of stem cell treatment injections into his buttocks and using these physical treatments like the Tesla Max, as I mentioned. And then I love to use this like carotid scanner to measure peripheral vascular disease, because you can pick up vascular disease in the carotid arteries, because Alzheimer's and cognition and so forth is not only a hormonal decline, it's an arterial problem. It's lack of circulation. So you've got to figure out every way to bring massive amounts of blood flow to that brain, and on a daily, hourly basis. When you do these things, you're going to see glimmers of light. That person's going to start coming to life. They're going to start possibly conversing with you. They're going to start noticing that you're present. And before you know it, they're going to be talking up a storm. There's like, oh my gosh, like a light bulb came back on, right? So I think in summary, find a practitioner like yourself, Joshua Hellman. Do someone who's specialized in this area with brain disorder and brain function. And then you decide you bring in team members like myself or others that are familiar with lifestyle medicine, with diet and exercise. But most important, I would say without exception, is my work that I did with Richard Bandler, with the work with Tony Robbins and Tad James, because most people have these limiting beliefs that you can overcome these diseases. And I think you have to convince the group around the patient that we must intervene, and it is possible. So just open up your mind, let go of negative beliefs and limiting beliefs. And this can be done at the deepest hypnotic level. And then as the patient starts to recover, you can do some timeline therapy with them as well. It depends on whether they're ambulatory or not, or they're able to even speak or not. And we get some tough cases. I know. I hear some of the challenges you come up against, I come up against. So we never give up on someone unless you've given up on yourself. So the number one thing is there's hope. Get started. The sooner you get started, the better the likelihood you'll get results. And if you don't see results, be open to new technologies and open up your mind and possibility to this is something that's going to take it. It won't happen overnight. It took years to develop poor circulation, clogged arteries, brain strokes, and dementia, hormonal deficiencies. But these things can be fixed in weeks. And if you're going to see a result, you're going to see it in a reasonable period of time. I never make promises, but it might be 3 months, 6 months, it might be a year. I never give up on someone so long as they're willing to participate and go to that next level.
Well said. How can people find you, Dr. Nick?
I think the best way, I have a website called foreveryoungevent.com, and I do these events virtual, and it has my bio and background and some of the team members like yourself that I work with, foreveryoungevent.com. I have a website for the peptides, delgadolabs.com. That's plural, delgadolabs.com. And I have pretty much our main website is on Black Friday special, with Black Friday coming here day after tomorrow, and that's at delgadoprotocol.com. So those are 3 quick ones if you drop in the descriptive notes, and we'd appreciate people learning about us, because when I have someone who has a brain disorder, I reach out to Joshua Hellman. I say, hey, we have a challenge here. What can we do to help this person? You're down in South Florida. I'm on the West Coast, Costa Mesa, California. And, we kind of bring our energy and thoughts together, and that's where you're going to see results.
Yeah, synergy. I love it. And are you on social media?
Yeah, you can find me at dr.nickdelgado, Dr. Nick Delgado. So dr.nickdelgado, Delgado. So you can find it. And then we have some virtual events that occur right in my studio. We put people on a plant-based diet for the day. We have an immersion program for doctors to learn my technologies. They come out to Costa Mesa, California, and I put them through all these treatments and technologies. And then I'll be at Las Vegas at the A4M, December 12th through the 14th, there at booth 1115. And that's going to be exciting too. There'll be a lot of friends that I'll be seeing there, and I look forward to seeing you there. I'm sure you'll be there.
Yeah, I'll definitely be there. And if someone wants to talk to you or email you, is that an option? And
yeah, of course.
How would they reach you?
Yeah, my direct email is nick@delgadoprotocol.com. And that's a quick way to reach me. And then on that is my contact phone number, and I'll often set up a Zoom session or I prefer to start people off in the group so the group dynamics helps them out. And our next event comes up in January and February. So we'll announce that at foreveryoungevent.com. That's where my schedule is usually listed as well.
Dr. Nick, thank you so much, not just for your service over many, many decades, but being willing to share that with our audience today and basically paint a picture of hope. Because sure, Alzheimer's and other chronic brain diseases, they can be devastating. But I love what you said. You never give up hope on them unless the patient and the family gives up. So that is a whole spiritual side that we didn't have time to get into, but I think that's just as important. So Dr. Nick, I salute you in everything you do, and keep it up.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. It's always fun because you and I have so much similar beliefs. We come from completely different worlds in training, and yet we came to many similar conclusions because the science bears the truth, and that's where it's at.